Time for the pre-meeting party to end. Put your drinks down, put your refreshments down. In fact, are they allowed in chamber?
Of course.
Oh, okay.
I thought I smelled something else.
We tried to schedule a League of Cities meeting in one of our cities the other day and found out we couldn't have food in the council chambers by city ordinance, so we had to move the meeting. Welcome, everybody. We're happy to see all of you here. Let the record show 3 members of the Board of Directors are present. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, but I note we were just told that 2 of the minutes C and D are not in our packet.
Item 1, C and D were not completed, so they'll be on a subsequent agenda.
I'd move the agenda as submitted with the 2 changes.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We'll move to the public comment portion of the agenda. There's an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any item that does not appear on the agenda. And I don't think we have cards for these meetings. It might be good for us to have some at some point, Richard. But if you'd like to come forward and state your name, and you have 3 minutes, so use it wisely.
Use it wisely, of course. Okay, well, great. And I'll bring the rest of the group down as well. My name is Christian Sandrock, and I'll let them introduce themselves. And I'm currently the interim health officer in Yolo County, and the rest of our team. And we wanted to just take a few moments to mention a unique opportunity we have here, both with the water agreement and with your board, and looking as we go forward towards 2016 to approach the idea of water fluoridation and taking care of our residents of Yolo County, and particularly the cities of Woodland and Davis. And as you all know, when we look at some of the things going forward, so Healthy People 2020, and some of the focuses on health disparities that are going to happen both in the United States and worldwide, water fluoridation and oral health is one of the big issues that shows up in that Healthy People 2020. From there, as we look backwards, this was considered one of the great achievements of our modern public health era, along with vaccinations and a number of other interventions that we have done. So as we look towards the future, we're certainly in favor at the health department in evaluating water fluoridation and that approach. And this is a unique opportunity as we look at our water sources and where we're going to get our water and how we deal with that to bring this discussion in and bring it forward. So we're from the health department. That's certainly our backing and our support and where we want to go. And I'll certainly have Jackie from First Five and some of our other pediatric community speak for a second as well.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity. I'm Jackie Hausman. I'm a program officer with First Five YOLO. And I just want to talk about the prevalence of early childhood caries and dental decay in our kids in Yolo County. We definitely have a problem. As you may or may not know, dental caries or tooth decay is a preventable disease, and it's the most common chronic disease of children. It's 5 times more common than asthma, 7 times more common than hay fever. It really is a problem, and it's a problem locally. In Yolo County, almost 20% of kids have never been to the dentist, and that's kids ages 0 to 18. For children ages 0 to 5, more than half have never had a visit to the dentist. So that's pretty shocking. Kids entering kindergarten are now required by state law to have an oral health assessment. And in Davis, 16% of those kids who were assessed had visible dental decay. And in Woodland, 27% of kids entering kindergarten had visible dental decay. So clearly, locally, and in these 2 particular cities, it's definitely a problem. Low-income kids in preschools, at Head Start preschools locally have been screened, and of those kids, 35 to 45% have visible dental decay. For school-age children, K through 6th, again, in particular schools with high levels of kids living in poverty, those kids are screened and have access to some preventive and early, treatment interventions. 30 to 40% of kids in Woodland in those schools have visible dental decay. Prevalence rates vary by socioeconomic status, and ethnicity, so kids living in poverty are much more likely to have dental decay problems, and Hispanic kids have higher rates of dental decay as well. So this is just a great opportunity to do some prevention. Community water fluoridation is one great strategy amongst a number of strategies to help prevent these problems. So we'd really like to kind of plant the seed and encourage you to really consider adding this to your plans. Thank you.
Oh, hi, I'm Rick Baker. I'm a retired practicing pediatrician, just finishing 35 years of practice. So I've had some interactions with patients on a regular basis talking about fluoride. I certainly endorse what's already been said about the value of fluoride in preventing tooth decay and the prevalence of dental problems in our community. What I'd like to speak to is just the practicality of if we do believe that fluoride is important in preventing dental disease, then practically speaking, it's better to do something on a preventative basis in the matter of fluoridating the water rather than expecting parents to pick up first of all, to get a prescription, to pick up the prescription, and then remember on a daily basis to give to their child. So practically speaking, this is a simple way of doing a very strong preventative action for dental care. And I think as all of us in the room probably know, those of us that are getting older, such as myself, or those of us that are just taking medicine on a regular basis, do you remember to take it every day? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. Anybody wish to remove any item from the consent calendar?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. The motion carries. Eric, I guess we're on to item 2, which would be for you.
Advancement of each.
Eric?
Thank you. About, I think it's September, I made a list of key actions that were well known among all the team members in terms of what needed to be accomplished by our agency. And those are, we haven't seen it yet. Did it catch? Well, you should have handouts in front of you. Do you? Okay, good. The key actions were highlighted I highlighted them back in September. These were key actions that we really needed to accomplish in order to stay on track and meet our schedule. And I'm really happy to say that in this past month, we've made a quantum leap toward achieving many of those key actions. On the next overhead, you'll see I tried to highlight just simply as I could the activities and accomplishments just during the past month from December through today. And they're really highlighted by our executed agreement with Tri-Cities and CPG and RD 2035. By virtue of this agreement, we haven't met, but made great strides toward achieving summer water transfers, intake site selection, property and right-of-way acquisition, and environmental mitigation. These are major accomplishments all in that 1 month. We also executed the agreement with UC Davis, which was another item on that list of key actions. And we've developed the RFQ for the design, build, and operate teams. On the previous exhibit, I meant to highlight the facility delivery method was one of the key action items that I highlighted in September. You made the decision back in October that the design, build, operate process was the way we would have our facilities designed, built, and operated. So we've made some great strides in the past month. And where does this put us on the schedule? I highlighted in red all the areas that were impacted by virtue of what we accomplished in December. And and this doesn't mean that we've finished it or we've totally accomplished each of those items, but we're well on our way to achieving finalization of each of those items. The intake site selection, of course, really still is dependent upon us and RD 2035 achieving grant funding for their facility. And but we have achieved basically solidification of where we're going to put our facilities in terms of the alignments. We achieved the summer water transfers, and the land acquisition was extremely important in securing a right-of-way for our pipelines. We still are on schedule and to achieve our bottom line, which is operation in the first quarter of 2016. We have a lot to go, a lot of work to do still, and so the planned activities in the next quarter are extensive. First, I want to highlight the fact we need to implement the agreement with Tri-Cities, CPG and RD 2035. There are a number of steps that we need to conclude, and those will be presented later in our session by Dick Shanahan. A key item is next week, January 18th, is obtain our water rights. That's going to be a very important week for us, another major milestone, and we're looking forward to those meetings on January 18th and probably on January 19th before the State Water Resources Control Board. There's two property acquisitions that are real important, and that's for the regional water treatment facility site as well as the Plan B intake site. We're working together with the City of Woodland to make sure that we finalize the acquisition or the use of that property that is being led by the City of Woodland. We have two environmental activities ongoing. We will, at the end of this month, we'll conduct a notice of preparation for the EIR for the Plan B intake site. Again, when I said we really haven't finalized the intake site selection, we're well on our way, but it's still, we have that loose end of the 100% funding that RD 2035 is dependent upon. And so we need to continue our efforts on the Plan B site. We're also completing our field work on the wetlands delineation for the Corps of Engineers 404 permit. This is an extremely important permit to allow us to get going into construction. A key item that you're going to hear about in another agenda item today would be to establish our benchmark water treatment process. And this is really key, and we want to bring it to you today because we want to have you understand the ramifications of how far do you go with treatment and what are the general costs and what are the benefits associated with it. We want to establish a benchmark by April that we can provide to our shortlisted design, build, operate teams against which they are going to be proposing, and also to allow them to look at other alternative ways that they can meet our benchmark requirements. We're issuing the RFQ for the design, build, operate teams. We will be issuing that later this month. And we also have started our negotiations to establish an agreement and then initiate design for the RD 2035 intake site. That work would be done with MWH, and those negotiations are underway. I will be calling a special board meeting probably the first week in February to get authorization to commence design. And again, I want to remind you, I want to thank the City of Davis and Bob Clark for being ahead of the game here in terms of getting approval through the City of Davis to authorize funds for design. That's part of the JPA. Each city has to approve the expenditure of funds for either design and or construction before we can proceed. So before the February meeting, I need that approval also from the City of Woodland. A key item is, as we're going through and developing the needs for each city in terms of capacity requirements for the facility, for the treatment facilities particularly, we need to establish the cost-sharing methodology, particularly for the water treatment plant, because it looks like it might be different than what we have in our joint powers agreement. And so we want to establish that in the coming months and bring it to you in case we do need to alter the JPA, the cost share of the water treatment plant in particular. We're continuing the process, and I like to say progress, but we're trying to find the most direct route to obtain grant funding. And we're working together now with RD 2035 and CPG to collectively to address this issue and define the path forward. We're working with Cap to Cap, and again, Chair Marble will be talking briefly about this, another agenda item. What we intend to do is really to create more strength with a number of agencies supporting our project and benefiting from our project. And then lastly, for the next 3 months, during the next 3 months, we'll be preparing a budget which is really tied to some of our other ongoing actions that I just mentioned. We'll be preparing that budget for the fiscal year 2012, which starts July 1st of this year, 2011. So we have a full plate of activities that we are going to be undertaking in the next 3 months. And I'd like to just highlight for you, because it is a key element. I mean, once we go through many of these permits, property acquisitions, finalization of agreements, the key focus is on our design, build, operate. And the next overhead shows that schedule. We intend to issue the request for qualifications at the end of this month. That will be followed probably by the middle of February with a pre-submittal workshop where the interested DBO teams will be able to give us their thoughts on what we set forth in the request for qualifications. And then we'll take that information as appropriate and issue an amended request for qualifications in the end of February. We'll receive a statement of qualifications from those interested firms, the teams, in March, and establish a short list in June. We will have a draft request for proposal that again we'll share with the shortlisted DBO teams to get their thoughts, and then reissue that in September of this year. We'll receive formal proposals. We anticipate receiving those in February of 2012. We're going to select our team by June of 2012, and following negotiations, come back to you for awarding the contract probably around October of 2012, which allows us to stay really ahead of our schedule, overall schedule. So that's hopefully a brief overview of what we're doing. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yes, Director Doty.
Thank you. Do you have any sense how many responses we're going to get for the RFQ?
The sense that we have, it could be 5, 6
That many?
teams, yes.
Will they be in California mainly or across the country?
Not all in California. They'll be, right.
Okay.
How many people in the audience are here for the DBO decision? Can we just ask the audience how many teams we'll have? Here we go.
Good observation.
We thought you were all fluoridation supporters.
No, it's always hard to find parking here.
The legal report will be forthcoming.
Question, Director Souza.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Bill. The issuance of the RFQ, to what degree will the board weigh in on any of that process?
That's what I'd like to talk with you afterwards. Not the whole full board, of course, but get your sense. I mean, if you want to tell me right now how much you'd like to be involved, but we'd like to share that information with you, obviously. And what is the right way to do it? We need to talk about that.
Yeah, that's the essence of my question, because it sounded like from your presentation that there would be an absence of participation from the board in any of that process.
No, definitely. Once we receive the request for qualifications and we make our deliberations, we obviously are going to share those thoughts with you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I was going to ask this later, but I might ask it now, or Eric, you can take it later. It's similar to Stephen's question, which is, we've got later on in the agenda the approval of this firm, Reftelis, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Reftelis, yes.
Reftelis, whatever, to help us with the DBO process.
Right.
And do they stay on all the way through selection, or are they part of just the RFQ, RFP?
Correct. It was intended through the RFQ, RFP process, an evaluation of the qualifications and of the proposals.
So really all the way to selection,
Yeah.
they're guiding us through that. Okay,
Right.
that's good. We'll maybe talk about that more, but good.
Very good. Thank you.
Great.
If there's no other questions, we'll move on to item 4, and, pardon me, item 3. Paul, I guess you're on there.
Thank you, Chairperson Marble. This item is essentially per the requirements of the JPA agreement, which is a quarterly report, treasury report regarding the revenues and expenditures and fund balances to date for the agency. In the past, we've attempted to slide this onto the consent calendar, but I will make a few comments on the item. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Through the activity through December 31st, and again, because we operate on a July to June fiscal year, essentially represents the first half of the fiscal year 2010-2011 activities against a revenue budget of $6,468,000, which really represents contributions from the member agencies, primarily the cities of Davis and Woodland, but also UC Davis. To date, we've collected about $3.1 million, which is essentially the first half installment payments from the two cities. Those have been duly received, and against the $6.47 million expenditure budget. In this most recent quarter, we've actually paid out $817,938, so a year-to-date expenditure of just under $920,000. We've also included, I think, a new sheet, which is at the third table in the report, attempting to capture expenditures that may have already been incurred, but for which the agency has not yet received invoices nor made payments. But essentially, the revenues are tracking per our budget and our process for doing periodic billings of the agencies. At this point, we're obviously well under our budget as it relates to year-to-date expenditures, but as you know, much of that expenditure is sort of tied up in our contractual obligations. And one of the items that we're working on for your next update, and in conjunction with the work leading to the development of a budget for the 2011-12 fiscal year, will be sort of a projection, more precise projection of where we think the expenditures will end at the current year, so we have a good handle on how much of this year's resources will actually be expended this fiscal year versus available to support activities of the agency going forward. Finally, I would just add that from a sort of balance sheet perspective, we've ended the period ending December 31st, 2010, with a fund balance of $2,581,000. So, and so we're in relatively good stead, at least as it relates to the management of this year's budget. Obviously, the issues going forward will tend to focus more on managing, again, the overall project costs and ensuring that we're able to adequately fund the activities, not only here at the JPA, but in collaboration with the budgets of the member agencies and the kind of rate-setting process that we talked about a couple of meetings ago. So, and I would probably just take personal privilege here to just commend the agency staff for their diligence in monitoring the budgets and the expenditures. It makes my job real easy, and I think we're in good hands.
Questions or comments? Do we have an action that we need here? Joe?
I just wanted to ask, the last two bullets, this is more for Eric, perhaps. But can you just remind me again, when I saw these things, here. So for on the real property attorney that we're bringing on, and then the hydraulic modeling, who are those? Or those aren't part of our normal teams? That's right. That was when we needed that on as part of those agreement. That's right. And then the real property.
It was associated with the agreement that we just negotiated. It was for the real property work aspect of those agreements, those set of agreements.
Okay, yeah. So both those were kind of the flurry of activity that was going on.
Well, there were separate activities. One was for the water right hearing, which is next week. The other was for the flurry of activity in November and December, which their services are largely completed. We may use that real property firm as needed going forward, but the heavy lifting from that firm is done.
That's all. That's great.
Great. Item 4. Is this yours, Richard? Or Eric? I'm not sure. Okay.
Yes, we just wanted to put this on the item just to close the loop with the board. At your meeting in December, you approved a package of 5 agreements involving 6 parties. At the time of your approval on the 21st of December, you were one of the first agencies to approve. So we're happy to report that as of today, the package of 5 agreements has been approved and signed by all parties to all agreements. So we now have a done package of contracts. What I handed out to the board members before the meeting, you will see a first draft of a checklist of various conditions and tasks and things to implement these contracts. These involve 3 major transactions that we will be dealing with in months and years to come. The water rights purchase, the land and rights-of-way acquisition, and then the joint intake acquisition. So staff will be moving forward on those tasks periodically. Some of the items will require board input, but mostly it's at this point a task effort to implement these contracts. The contracts significantly have significant deadlines and off-ramps for the agency if things don't occur as per our schedule, or if there's new unsuspected information that we learn about that makes a deal not what we thought it was. We've got various off-ramps that hopefully we will not need to exercise, but we've preserved those options for the agency if necessary. So with that, there's no action at this time, just an information item. And again, congratulations to the board. I think this is a successful package of contracts for the agency, and we look forward to implementing them. Any questions?
Do you have a question, Steve?
Yes, thank you. As far as CPG is concerned, do we know who their management team is going to be, and are the parties any different from those we have been working with in the past, besides the attorneys and the drafting of the agreements?
The joint intake agreement obligates 2035 to appoint an intake project manager within 30 days. That appointment has not yet been made. Agency engineering staff have had some discussions with 2035. Some of the players are the same, some are different. I understand that I'm informed that Bob Thomas is a new member of the RD 2035 board, and he's on the board now, and that they've got also have a vacancy on that board. That it's a 3-member board that they'll be filling in short term. But the key appointment there will be whoever serves as 2035 intake project manager, and we just don't know that yet. The engineering team is trying to have some discussion and input on that, but ultimately it's a 2035 selection.
And I would imagine as soon as we know who that party will be informed either via an email or through a update at one of our meetings.
We will make sure that, because it will happen well before your next meeting, so we'll be sure to get that out.
Great, thank you very much.
Any other questions? I think on behalf of the board, we, and I can be corrected if the feeling is different, but we certainly want to commend our legal team and Eric Mishi and the individual members from our city staffs who were involved in making these agreements happen in a timely and productive way for the agency. We were the cheering crew, but you did the work and you did a great job. Thank you. Thank you very much. Item 5, information regarding recent cap-to-cap meetings from board members and staff. Maybe I can take a minute, and Eric, you want to go first?
Well, I'm relying on you to
Okay.
give your update, but it's really to recap what we've been doing. Chair Marvel has been much involved in this cap-to-cap as he has been in previous years, and we're just starting to get involved and to pursue other avenues as well. But
I think the back door is locked. So can somebody let the individuals in?
Not a very public meeting, is it?
No, it's, Paul, could you see that this door is unlocked out here, please? Thank you. Sorry about that, Eric.
that's okay.
That's an important interruption. Thank you for making it. Since I reported last month regarding the first, I think I reported here about the first Water Resources Team meeting. Is that correct? And I want to update a little bit on the Water Resources Team, and then I want to couch a couple of things that I would say in relation to a new committee that has been formed at the Metro Chamber called the Flood Water Committee. And let me highlight that committee first, maybe, and then I'll backtrack to the Water Resources Team for the cap-to-cap. They are two separate entities, though many of the individuals involved are some of the same people. The committee that's been formed at the Chamber is not a cap-to-cap entity. It is a Chamber entity as a joint water flood team in an effort to coordinate regionally flood and water resources efforts on a year-round basis. And the desire of the Metro Chamber is to have water not simply be a process where we go back on the cap-to-cap and do some lobbying, or where at the state ledge day, which the Metro Chamber does in February, that some lobbying be done and then it's kind of forgotten about. The purpose of this committee is to ensure that there remains a concerted, focused effort on behalf of the Chamber members who are part of the committee to ensure lobbying goes forward in a steady year-round fashion, and that there's follow-up on the cap-to-cap effort and follow-up on the state effort that takes place in February. And I'll just make a couple other comments about that committee from my notes. The first committee meeting was held just a couple of days ago, and I attended that meeting along with Tim O'Halloran from the Yolo County Flood Control Water Conservation District. We were the two people that were there from this county. This particular committee is presented to be a forum where the Chamber develops policy in regards to water matters. So I think that's an important distinction, both flood matters and water resources matters. I mentioned it's a year-long advocacy effort. It's a feedback loop after the cap-to-cap to develop a list of action items. It's supposed to be a less event-centric committee and more of a consistent year-round water approach. And it's also meant to be an avenue to provide constant dialogue with the current administration, both at the federal and the state level. So there is a concerted effort to enhance this committee. It's not an attempt to recombine the flood team and the water resources teams from the cap-to-cap. It is an attempt, however, to look at a more regional approach on the part of the Metro Chamber to flood matters. So, and a couple of things were mentioned at that meeting that I think I could bring up here. One is that it's anticipated that Senator Feinstein will chair a committee, and they thought the name would be Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So and that will have a water component to it, and that Senator Boxer would be chairing one or two committees also related to, one of which was related to water. And I didn't have time to copy that down, but I think it's important as we move forward with any attempt at lobbying or to indicate clearly the federal nexus that's involved with our project to federal funding, that we have communication with those two senators' offices. It's probably no secret to anybody here that the House will have a policy, or is expected to take a policy, of no earmarks. But the Senate, it's thought, will be doing earmarks, and well, I guess we'll be discussing this lobbying effort a little later, but just to bring that up. Also, that committee wants to ensure that DWR is fully integrated. DWR has a list of priorities, they have a list of projects, and frequently, not frequently, on occasion, those lists have not coincided with what's gone on with Cap to Cap. And so there's a concerted effort being made to ensure that the projects that are espoused by the Metro Chamber and promoted are in agreement with what's being done with DWR. And they did ask for any specific projects, and I forgot to mention this to you, Eric, but to ask to make sure that you contacted Lanny Arena over at DWR, or I think it's Rod Mayer, it was the other individual, and to make sure that our project is listed in a way that we're comfortable with and is part of their listing. And the other thing in regards to this flood water committee is there will be a legislative day at the state capitol on February the 22nd, Tuesday afternoon. It will be a noon until till dusk event. And this will be done in a little different fashion, which I found very intriguing, and I kind of wanted to bring it up here to see if there were board members that thought they would like to participate. I think the cost is $100 per person, but they will be grouping the participants in what they call pods. And instead of having an entire water team go in for legislative advocacy to meet with different committee chairs at the state level, they will have one or two water folks along with transportation folks, along with the other folks, so that there will be an opportunity to have interchange among the different priorities for the region at the state level. So just make you aware of that. And registration, I guess if there were any members that wanted to participate in that, that could be coordinated through Eric Mishi. So each team would have people from the various issue teams on that pod in that approach. Now back to the water resources team that will be part of Cap to Cap, and some of this will dovetail in what Eric's going to bring up later in regards to what lobbying efforts we feel is appropriate as a board. But the focus of the water team will continue to be, has not changed as of 2 days ago, will continue to be the Delta fix. And the importance of the Delta fix, of the federal nexus that our project and others have with the Delta fix, and the requirements that are being made upon us and others, including the Regional Sanitation District in Sacramento, because of federal clean water standards. And the effort in Washington will be focused around what we are doing as a region, including our agency, to assist in the Delta fix. And clearly this project is in its mandated purpose is to help achieve a Delta fix. So it'll be what we are doing to help achieve the Delta fix, and therefore, because of its federal nexus, what our ask is from the federal government in helping us to achieve that Delta fix. And it's still contemplated that the Sacramento treatment plant will be one of the major projects as part of that approach, that our project will be part of it, and that there will likely be an American River flood American River Flow Standard and operations component to that. There will still be a listing of other regional needs in that effort, but the approach will largely be centered on the Delta, achieving the Delta fix and in our contribution. So I think this is it's good that the efforts of our agency are well known regionally, and that I think it's also important that we continue to have to be regionally involved because we're not isolated. So I think that's all I have to report on that. Are there any questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, Chairman Marble, just to clarify, so on the cap-to-cap water agenda, in the category of Delta Fix, the Clean Water Agency's joint intake with RD 2035 will be one of the three thrusts of the committee, I mean, as it's anticipated at this point in time?
Correct.
Okay.
I think that's a fair statement, because Eric has been charged and is now showing on the Metro Chamber list of who's writing the paperwork representing our end of this, but that's what's currently anticipated.
Okay. And then have we, and this may well be in the 2007 EIR and so on, but have we kind of tried to quantify the value to the delta of, removing the, I don't know how to categorize the intake.
The boron, the selenium.
Well, the boron, the selenium, but I'm thinking of the fish aspects of the, the current status of the RD 2035 intake. But I guess within the context of cap to cap, we have certain environmental benefits and project benefits, and I'm just thinking, are we characterizing kind of the relative merits of our project, in relation to the other projects, not to put anybody else down, but also just to make sure that people really see this as not a small project over in Yolo County, but something that really has a benefit to the Sacramento River and the Delta.
Yeah, let me just add one comment to that before Eric chimes in, because this was interestingly addressed 2 days ago in this committee meeting, not by myself, although I chimed in, but John Woodling, one of the co-chairs of the committee, couched our project in terms of the numbers of people being served. And when you look at the $2 billion of the Sacramento Sanitation District project and how many people they serve, and you look at our $400 million and how few people we serve.
400,000.
Pardon me.
Nice try, but all of the 400 million people of Yolo County deserve all of the money of the cap-to-cap.
What I meant was our $400 million project.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
In relation to the 100 and how many 30,000 residents that we're serving.
Probably tops.
When you look at it on a per capita basis, our project is extremely costly,
okay.
And they highlighted that. So that to me, that's a good thing. That shows regionally that this is viewed as a large project, not a small one.
Yeah, and I don't know. I defer to you guys that are right in the mix exactly the right way to say it, but yeah, whatever we can do, obviously, to give ourselves as much standing as possible in this forum as possible. I mean, I also think that one way to look at it is the marginal benefit of an investment in dollars in our project now, because we are right at that point of that inflection point of making investments, and a bad project or a less than optimal project now on our side, is not good for the region. So there's a certain amount of leverage to these dollars into our project at this time, in terms of one intake, a higher quality intake, getting a bad intake off of the river, and then all the water quality angles to it as well. So anyhow, I thank you very much for your work to integrate this regionally. to the benefit of everybody in Woodland and Davis.
Yeah, we're kind of trying to couch it as a joint ag-urban environmental project,
Yeah.
which it really is.
And the population of Yolo County is not 400,000 either.
No, it's about 200.
200, yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Okay.
We're shrinking as we speak.
Eric, did you have any other comments?
Just in response to your question, and we've continually been looking at the impacts on fisheries and the environment associated with the project through the EIR and continuing to do so, but that's an excellent point because our project is really more than a water supply project. It's more than a wastewater project. It's an environmental project, and when you couple the benefits that each of our agencies are bringing to the table, it's everything. As Chair Marble indicated, it's an ag, urban, environmental, et cetera. So there's a lot of benefits, and definitely our look at fisheries is part of the equation.
Yep. Good.
Director Doty.
Sure, just a quick question. Well, and a comment. The Floodwater Committee, you said that it's regional. Is that SACOG region?
Well, it's the Sac Metro Chamber region, which pretty much coincides with SACOG.
Do they wrap in?
I don't know if it is exactly or not, but
Do they wrap in El Dorado and Nevada also? Do you know?
does SACOG or do we?
No, do they? Does
No,
the
I
Metro
I
Chamber?
think Metro Chamber does, yes.
Yeah.
We've had people participating from up I-80 and up I-50, so yes, I would think they do.
Okay. And then just a quick comment. I think our project has several things going for it. Besides the environmental issues, we've put together a JPA that is showing the cooperation between two cities who really, other than an MOU for a buffer zone, haven't historically participated on pretty much anything. And we're responding to a regulatory issue. And I'm sitting here thinking, how do we improve the delta? We're still dumping the water. But then I realized with the river water, we're pumping less. So we're going to be dumping less of the pollutants.
Chair Marble?
Yes.
I would concur with everything that's just been said by both Marty and Joe as far as the benefits of the project, but least we not forget that the actual treatment facility of this project has tremendous environmental benefits, particularly on the tail end of both of our wastewater treatment plants in the effluent that's going out into the environment and its effect not only on aquatic species but also aviarian species. So I think it has a multiplier in that if all we're asking for is what is the smaller component of the project, which is the intake facility, that's wonderful, but I think we also should focus on the larger component of the facility, which is the intake facility or the treatment facility and the conveyance of that water, all of the piping that has to go into conveying that water.
Chair Marble, I'd
point.
also like to point out that this is almost what they call shovel-ready. We've done the theoretical work. This is now practical. This is not, we have to fix the wastewater treatment plant. We know exactly what we need to do. And we've done our homework.
Yeah, very good. We have some deadlines that we have to achieve in relation to some of the paperwork going forward. We have to have an authorization request in the next very few weeks, and so I think Eric will be following up on that along with city staff, and we'll move forward. All good suggestions, thank you.
One more quick question on the cap-to-cap. I understand where the House is going, and I suspected the Senate might do earmarks, but will there be any authorization or appropriation bills that we can look at getting put in through agencies?
Well, we're looking through to funding in the president's budget, and that's being pursued every way we know how to pursue it.
Very good.
I could talk to Pete Souza, the photographer.
I'll do it, please. Yeah, certainly being in the president's budget is of great significance if we're able to get there, and because of the federal nexus this project has and the mandates we're being forced to, that are forcing our hand in it, I think we have every reason to pursue being in that budget. It's just making sure we're doing it the right way, and we're trying to make sure we do that.
Could I ask one more quick question?
Uh-huh.
That was something that I was trying to wrap around, what is the federal interest in the Delta? Is it the Federal Clean Water Act, or what is their interest there?
Well, they don't want to see California fall off, shrivel and die.
Well, I understand.
Yeah. Staff could probably comment on that better than me.
All I know, I can't speak for the federal government, but I know that CalFed programs have been around a long time, where there's a collaborative effect between the federal resource agencies working with the California resource agencies to enhance and save or maintain the Delta, improve the Delta situation, and working collaboratively with municipal agencies and water supply issues. Other than that, I think they're just fulfilling what their mandate is as a federal organization in terms of helping the state.
Did CalFed actually produce anything?
I know they've had a few fits and starts, but
Well, I know it was a lot of money, but I'm not sure there was a product.
Well, one of the things that's really close to home is the CalFed Ecosystem Restoration Program, which directly affects us because that's what's providing the 100% grant funding to RD 2035 for the intake. So that was part of the CalFed program.
Okay, thanks.
Because of the current role that our agency is anticipated to have in the cap-to-cap trip this year in the Delta Fix, I've added an item on the agenda to approve Eric going on this cap-to-cap trip, and that would require a vote of this board to do so. And I'd make that motion.
A second.
Any discussion?
My only question here is, whether that's enough. I mean, quite frankly, if there's any other board members that might be interested or something, I think it's great to send Eric. But it's a very productive trip, not just in the lobbying, but in the regional connections that we have to make. So I'm certainly supportive of the motion, but I'm even curious if there's some merit to going further. But.
Yeah, and let me, I'll make one comment. We are looking closely and held a meeting prior to this meeting with RD 2035 and with Bob Thomas and others in relation to our lobbying efforts, and I think we'll discuss that. And it appears highly probable to me, and I think to Eric and to Bob Thomas and others, that we will need to have several trips on our own and at some level of involvement of this board prior to the cap-to-cap trip. And my personal feeling is I'd be happy to let someone else go on cap-to-cap other than me. I'd rather see us put our money into those other trips that where we can be involved in our project only.
Director Carolloza, in December, Chair Marble was authorized to go. Did you? I just want to make sure you remembered that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chair Marble?
Yes.
I'm trying to go also for the city of Woodland, if we can find the money. And they anticipated going on the transportation team, but I'd be happy to also participate on water.
All the help is, I think, important if anybody is back there. And we don't have a lobbying strategy yet. What item is that, Eric? Or you?
It's not on the agenda for lobbying.
Okay. We'll have to come back to that, but I echo the sentiment. We've got to be there. This is a year where funding is low to non-existent. That's how I refer to it. So I don't want to employ more resources than we need to have. I think it would be very helpful if more members of the board had the time to be involved in the team meetings that happen ahead of the trip. I think that's the most crucial place where our project gets highlighted and discussed. But anyway, whatever the board wants.
Yeah.
Quick comment too. I know that we've relied on. I know you and I know that we've relied in the city and other special districts over the last decade for the earmark process to bring money into Yolo County. That's been built some really good projects for the cities and for the county. But realistically, the earmarks are only, what, 1 or 2% of the federal budget? They're actually a fairly small portion. So even though that there may not be earmarks coming out of the House this year, I'm not that worried about the availability of funding. I suspect you can get it through other budgeting, like appropriation bills and authorizations, hopefully the transportation reauthorization for transportation projects, but not this one. But so even though that was a route that we kind of got used to using, I'm not that disturbed that we're going to have to find a different route.
Well, I'm going to try a motion or ask for a friendly amendment to at least authorize the chair to include one other board member equivalent, so to this, just to kind of have that in your back pocket, and then defer to you and I think our executive director to decide whether to employ it or not. But I do think we are at kind of this very critical point, and it would be worth, being able to think about whether we do that. If Marty got 50% funding or something from Woodland or Stephen from Davis or something, it might be nice to up our presence a little bit. And especially if we're going to go back more, kind of having been there with Cap to Cap, plants the seed and gets the education process going. So anyhow, I would offer that as a friendly amendment. Probably not going in the direction that you thought it was going to go, Bill. But
no, it's a hard hard one to call. I mean, we know these are ratepayer dollars that we're using, and you just want to be so careful that what you're doing is the most bang for the buck in their behalf, and I think we all struggle with that. And that's why I say I'm happy to not be there. I feel like what we're doing, it's probably important for this board to have representation there, but I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I'll change my second then to accept the amendment.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 6. I asked for this item to be on the agenda again this month. You'll recall that 2 months ago I brought forward the concept again, and it wasn't something new. We've talked about it previously, but the idea of including a member of the Yolo County Board of Supervisors as a non-voting member of this board. I did what I was charged to do in relation to those discussions, and felt like there was a favorable desire on the part of the board, and you may already know, it may not be news to any of you, but the Board of Supervisors did approve on Tuesday having a member of the board be part of this board as a non-voting member, and Mr. Saylor was appointed to that position by the Board of Supervisors in the eventuality that this board felt it appropriate to include the Yolo County as a non-voting entity on the board. So I'm happy to make that report and to make a motion that this board include a member of the Yolo County Board of Supervisors as a non-voting member of the board.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion?
Can you review for me the benefits to this board?
I can review from my perspective the benefits, but I think Eric, having worked with a board that was organized in that way with a non-voting member, doing a similar thing to what we're doing, Eric could probably approach that better, and then I'll chime in my comments at the end.
I think I've given my opinion a couple of board meetings ago, but this was with regard to the Freeport Regional Water Authority, where we had a 4-member board, 2 members from East Bay Mud's board and 2 members from the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, but we had a 5th member, an associate member from the city of Sacramento, and that associate member had no voting privileges, and the city of Sacramento had no financial investment at all in the project. what was key was a number of the facilities were in the city of Sacramento, on city of Sacramento property, and through city of Sacramento neighborhoods. And I believe that format worked very well for Freeport in that it gave a representation to people who were being affected but didn't really have a part, essentially, in the project itself. And it was Councilmember Pennell represented an excellent job in voicing her opinion at every meeting, and it was very much followed and listened to by other board members. I think also the benefit is, that I've said before, is I think there's strength in numbers. We talked about the grant funding. I think the more cohesive of a team in a larger area, a larger number of people, I think amplify our position in attaining grant funding. And I think looking toward the future, I believe in the water business, if you will, that we're going to see some political boundaries starting to fade away, perhaps a little bit more, as water becomes increasingly more valuable and important, and looking at regional ways of addressing those issues. So I think it sets the stage for the future as well. So
the other couple things I'd add to that is, as we pursue both state and federal funding, I think to have a member of the county board of supervisors, part of the board that's pursuing that funding, will be helpful to the board and helpful to this agency in having a better chance of some of that funding taking place. And we certainly have land use issues that are still ahead of us, that it will be helpful to have that representation from the county at this board meeting. And there will be a greater, I think, cooperation between the county and this agency, hopefully as a result of it, where water is a collaborative process. Anyway, that's my perspective. Richard, are we out of line and taking?
The only comment on the motion is under the joint powers agreement, this particular action requires a resolution. A meeting or two ago, there was a proposed resolution in the board's agenda packet, and so if the board's inclined to take this action, be staff's recommendation that you approve that resolution, which would so accomplish.
Do we know the date of that meeting? We'll at least reference that. But,
It was, I don't, because in the last couple of months, we've had several meetings, and I don't recall which one it was. It was not the meeting on the 21st. I know that it was one of the ones before that. I apologize for not knowing the meeting. I don't have the, or the other option is, I don't know, is to put this matter on a subsequent board meeting agenda. The problem there is you're not scheduled to meet until April.
I was going to bring up that the other option would be to have it associated with a special meeting, which we're going to have to call early February.
That's right.
Associated with authorization of our design activities on the intake facility. So we're going to have that special board meeting anyway. We might tack this onto that agenda if that's more workable.
I'm personally comfortable with the way it was on the prior agenda, but defer to the board. I'd like to see us move ahead.
yeah, is Lynn Ann finding what agenda it was on, or? They're looking. Okay.
I see mention, yeah, I think it was, because I see mention in the December 9th minutes of the discussion.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a November meeting, but
I did
That
too.
I thought it was the mid-November meeting. for some
Can we postpone action on this item while staff gets that information and move forward? Is that okay?
Do you mean?
Okay.
Postpone within
Postpone
these
it
two.
this
Postpone the vote, no, postpone the vote that we just motioned and
Okay.
seconded. Can we hold that off in the meeting while staff researches it, and to take advantage of the time, can we move forward to the next item?
Okay.
All right.
I did have one comment on this, though, so
Yes.
maybe I can draw it out for.
Yeah, good.
But
Stand up and.
Yes, that's right. Filibuster, right?
No.
I'm all, I'm all for this, but actually, I wanted to ask,
Don't even go
this maybe for Richard. We have, I think, another non-voting member of this Clean Water Agency, and that's the University of California, which is here but sitting in the audience. So we're essentially adding the county to the parallel status or a similar status as the university, is that right?
Correct. It would be the identical status under the joint powers agreement.
Good. So are we going to let Sid sit up here and
Yes.
Don sit up here in the future?
Yeah, that's kind of a
Okay.
call for the board in
Yes.
terms of,
Except,
yep. They certainly may.
Okay, you're not, Sid, you're going to be much more
Although-
conspicuous in the audience once we have a non-voting member up here.
Although I think there was some question on that because the university still had not signed
that's right.
a participatory agreement yet.
Well, there's two statuses under the joint powers agreement. The lesser status, if you will, is that of a participating agency, and that's what we're talking about now with respect to the County of Yolo and UC's participation, just to simply participate with the board as a non-voting member. And that may be sitting up there on the dais, or it may be out in the audience. Either way is fine. It's really up to the board. The other status as a full-paying participant is sort of a higher second status that we addressed last meeting with the agreement with the University of California. So there's sort of two statuses there.
And that's the agreement to actually receive water through the
Right.
water project.
Yeah.
But I don't anticipate the county would be receiving any
No.
water services.
The county would only be in that status as a participating agency to participate on the board as a non-voting member.
So mainly what we're looking for, listening to Eric's discussion, is for them to bring in the perspective from the county and also maybe a conduit for information back to the Board of Supervisors. Is that the major purpose?
You asking me?
Well, I'm
Oh,
asking
okay.
somebody.
Right, no, definitely. I mean, they represent their respective, in that other case, they represented the council interest, the city's interest, and provided that to us, our board, and then in turn, they took back to the city the progress and other decisions that were made and perspectives. But I presume that would be, if I'm understanding you correctly, that could be the role of the county representative on our board as well.
Okay, so thank you, Marty. So to clarify, if we vote in favor of the resolution that
Did you
was
find it?
before us previously, we will be putting the County of Yolo in the same position or status with respect to this board as the university currently is. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and then there may in the future be a different status for the university because it will be a recipient of the water, but that is to be determined.
Correct.
Okay, I'm good.
But I don't think the university still becomes a voting member. They're
Correct.
Right,
they're
it's
simply
just,
signed on a contractual basis to receive
Yeah,
water.
at that point, they become more of a financial partner.
Right.
okay.
I think,
Sid, are you willing to sit up here at the next meeting?
talking with Richard about that earlier in the first meeting or two of the board meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
what
bringing it up
happened?
right now.
All right,
if
I'm good,
you
thank
don't
you.
mind.
Chair Marble, I have found the meeting in which it was listed, and it's October 28th, and I'm trying to pull it up right now.
You're going to take
the
over
actual-
Lynann's job if you're not careful, Steve.
That's all the technology.
But while I bring it up, I wanted to add that I think the participation by a Yolo County supervisor is critical because many of the aspects of the project have to do with environmental mitigation and habitat, water resources, and I think that to have that perspective from a county on our body, just to, within the discussions that we have as we go along, because as we're moving forward, we're really starting to move into construction phases in which many of those aspects will be brought up and having to be dealt with beyond just how they were evaluated in the EIR. And so I think to have that interested party up here, and particularly given who they have at this point nominated to serve with us, he has all the knowledge prior, and I think that'll be very helpful, not only for the Board of Supervisors, but for us too.
Accord.
I'd like
Any
to
other-
read the resolution before we vote on it, if you don't
Yeah.
mind, if you can find it.
It's 55 pages, I'm trying to get through it. Oh, I forget.
Do you have it?
I I know what I need to do.
But Greg is looking on his to find.
I'm just going through my emails where we've sent packets back and forth, and I don't have that packet in my emails.
It is, I can tell you which item it is, and I've got it right here.
Steve's a salesman for iPads, and, you know, he's doing a great
It's a
job up
marvelous
there.
thing.
Item 6, it was item 6 on the October 28th agenda, and let's see if it shows page, let's see if I can bring this up, with Goodreader, which is a nice app, Goodreader, if you don't have an iPad.
You work on commission basis?
What's our policy on product placement?
That's right.
Chair Marble?
Yes.
If you'd like, I can head into the city offices and print out a hard copy to bring back here if you want to delay action on
Why don't we
this
do
and move on
that?
to the
And
next
then,
item.
and then it'll be in front of everybody. Let's do that.
Okay.
Item 7, Project Water Treatment Quality Report.
Thank you.
Eric?
This is an information item. We've asked Dr.
There it is.
to update the board on work being done. Water quality issues, thank you, and the treatment requirements associated with that. Dr. Trussell, or Trussell Technologies, is part of the West Yost Associates program management team and has been working on this issue for probably the past year. And I'd like to have him just give you a briefing on where we stand in terms of the assessment of treatment technology and processes relative to the water quality that we're going to be encountering off the Sacramento River. So, Rhodes.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay.
Try and stand up here and have Celine help me with the slides, so if this works. So my goal here is to talk about water quality. I want to provide an overview of the raw water quality, the quality goals, and in the process of doing that, I'm trying to figure out where I look here to follow my slides myself. Usually they're right there, but they're all over the place. I think I need to see what's on the screen, but thank you. So the way I want to approach that is I'm going to outline the key water quality issues. Then I'm going to take each of the water quality issues and talk about what we've proposed as plant performance goal, and then talk about how that affects this benchmark treatment strategy that we're pursuing, and then at the end kind of provide an outline of the benchmark treatment strategy and how it syncs with all that we've discussed previously. So first of all, what do I mean by this term benchmark? Well, the benchmark is really just a preliminary design of the overall treatment process. And together with the water quality goals and the service contract, this benchmark describes our needs to the people that bid on the project. The benchmark is not a specification as we would have in a conventional project. It's really a concept that describes how we'll meet our objectives. And doing the benchmark helps us as a team agree what we're going to do or what we want, and at the same time it also gives the bidders a clear idea of what they have to supply if they want to make us happy. So let me first outline the treatment steps that are sort of in a typical plant. The next slide shows 4 treatment steps that are all found in almost any river water treatment plant. The first step is silt removal. The next step is what we call clarification. The next step, filtration, and the last step, primary disinfection, which takes us from the river water to drinking water. In the silt removal step, if you imagine taking a mason jar with river water and putting it on the kitchen table, the stuff that settles out in the first 5 minutes, that's sand, silt, that's what we're trying to do in that step. But if you leave that mason jar sitting on your kitchen table overnight, there'll still be cloudiness in the water. And that's because there are some particles that are so fine, Einstein's of these particles, they're colloidal in size, and just the vibration of the water molecules keeps them in suspension, and they're opposite charge to each other, so they repel each other. So they stay in solution. So we intervene with chemicals to affect how these particles attract each other, and we stir the water to coagulate to make big bunches of particles called flocka, and these then settle, and that we call clarification, which is what the yellow box symbols. And that gets the water pretty clear in terms of the measure of cloudiness we use, turbidity. The turbidity might be, say, 2, where we're starting with hundreds sometimes. But we like to have our drinking water on the order of a tenth or a couple of tenths or so, and that we accomplish by filtration, typically through granular media and increasingly through membranes. And following that, you do primary disinfection. Typically, that's been done with chlorine, increasingly other alternatives. So the target of this very traditional train of treatment processes is the clarification or the improvement of the appearance of the water and the removal of any pathogens that might affect it. And this transformation of the water from muddy and not necessarily safe to clear and safe is one of the strongest symbols connected with a developed country. You go to a developed country, you can drink the water and feel safe. You go to a developing country, maybe. And that transformation occurred in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century. That's the transformation that we're looking for here in part. Next slide. So I want to talk about 3 water quality issues that our treatment facility here need to address in particular. This turbidity or cloudiness issue that we were talking about first, an issue of disinfection byproducts I want to talk about a little bit later, and the last is synthetic organic chemicals, the pharmaceuticals, some personal care products, endocrine disruptors, pesticides, things that cause taste and odors, a lot of the issues that are the most visible in the trade literature. Let me take first this question of turbidity or cloudiness. Here I have a diagram or a plot of the turbidity in the water in the vicinity of our river intake, our proposed river intake, over the last year and a half or so. Typically, the measure we use is called turbidity units. Typically, the levels average around 10 to 20 units. But you'll notice in the winter of 08-09, it went as high as 200, and then again in the winter of 09-10, it went as high as 300, and there are periods where it's gone, and not shown here, as high as 600. So the take-home message here is there are significant periods of time when this sand, silt, turbidity is fairly high, and high for significant periods of time. And so the question is, how does this affect this treatment train that we just talked about, the 4 steps? Well, the first 2 steps, the silt removal and the clarification, which we sometimes call the pretreatment steps, are the ones that are most affected, will provide we certainly will need a silt removal facility then. Typical example would be the grit basins you see there. And then we'll have this clarification facility I described second. And we have an illustration of that there. The coagulation and flocculation take place in the little squares you see at the top, and then those long basins you see below provide an hour and a half or so of sedimentation. And then, of course, all this stuff we collect has to be dealt with, so we have a solids management problem. And in fact, one of the key design errors is often made in treatment plants like this when they have a long period with high turbidity is that there's not enough, there's facilities put in to settle it out, but there's not facilities enough to get it away from the plant. And so that will be a second issue we'll have to deal with. So the solution in terms of our treatment strategy is we want to choose an alternative that provides robust pre-treatment steps, these 2 first steps. So the next issue is this disinfection byproduct issue. Here, we face a balance between the job of disinfection, which is the most important element that began in the first part of the 20th century that made the water safe so we didn't get typhoid and cholera and things like that, and the formation of disinfection byproducts, where we followed the disinfection strategy with comfort in the first half or even 3/4 of the 20th century. In fact, you would have to say public health people probably take a different view of it than a lot of the citizens do, where you know, the chlorine that we were using in the water is persistent, and so it appears at the tap. And whereas some customers might say, or typical consumers might say, well, you know, that chlorine odor is terrible, I hate that. But if you're a public health person, you might say, that chlorine that I put in the water at the treatment plant is still there, the water is still safe. So we've shifted from that philosophy. In the last part of the 20th century, we discovered that the chlorine we add to the water reacts to the natural organic matter in the water and produces things like chloroform and bromodichloromethane and dibromochloromethane and bromoform and haloacetic acids and dihaloacetonitriles and chloropicrin and on and on and on. So now we're playing this game of the balance between disinfection and disinfection byproducts, and we face regulations from the federal government and the state that require us to do the disinfection and do a good job and not to produce disinfection byproducts in the process. And in accomplishing this balance, we have this scenario I painted in this slide here where we have the source water, we have some kind of treatment plant like we're talking about building, and then we have the distribution system. And the primary disinfection, the job of making the water safe, happens at the treatment plant. We have to do something to remove and inactivate microorganisms. What we call secondary disinfection is we're required now by law in the United States, in the United States, to provide a residual throughout the distribution system. 95% of samples we take from the distribution system have to show a residual. So our proposal to meet this balance in this project is to accomplish the primary disinfection with ozonation, which is a great disinfectant, and which produces few DBPs, particularly in this water, which doesn't have bromide to any significant degree, so we're not going to get bromate, which is the principal one that we worry about with ozone. And in secondary disinfection, to use chloramines, which produce less of a chlorine odor for an equivalent concentration and produce far fewer DBPs. Can I have the next slide? Then I want to move on to this question of synthetic organic chemicals. In talking about synthetic organic chemicals, there are two issues we want to address. The first is pesticides. I mean both pesticides and herbicides when I use that term. And the second is this question of pharmaceuticals and personal care products, endocrine disruptors, other emerging products, chemicals that we might be concerned about. We prepared a white paper on this issue, which I think you have in front of you. It's in a book. Yeah, and you're free to look through that, and if you have other questions, get back to us about it. But I'll just try and quickly summarize the essence of it here. And also, we are doing sampling of the water, and that sampling continues. First, on the pesticide question, all pesticides, the use of all pesticides is regulated. Because of that regulation, we were able to identify 405 pesticide products that are used in the river basin that drains to the point where we're taking the water out. 113 of these are either regulated, in drinking water I mean, specifically, or they're in high use, say more than 10,000 pounds over the basin per year. So we studied those, and we ended up with 85 of those in our monitoring program. The criteria being all of those, of course, that are regulated in drinking water, as well as others that we identified as being widely used and of interest from the standpoint of public health for some reason. Next slide. Also useful to know is that so far in our monitoring and other monitoring we've seen in the area, none of these pesticides are above the drinking water limits. But also I think worth noting is thiobencarb or bolero, which is a pesticide that is used in the rice industry in this area. But it's still used in this watershed. The practice of use is changing a little bit, and I think in ways that favor us. But nevertheless, it has been a taste and odor problem in the past. It reacts with chlorine and makes an odor. So we'll be wanting to do something about that. On the question of pharmaceuticals and personal care products, we reviewed that this is an evolving issue where information is changing all the time. We reviewed nationwide occurrence in wastewater throughout the U.S., which is the primary source for these compounds. We looked at all the sources upstream and estimated what we might expect to see, which ones most likely to appear in the Sacramento River. And we looked for those in our monitoring, and there was also other monitoring done that looked for compounds in addition to those. A small number of those were found at low levels. They're probably no health significance. All the information on what we found so far is there in your packet for you to look at, and I'd be happy to discuss it if you like. Our recommendations are to continue our monitoring plan for both the pesticides and pharmaceuticals, but to select a treatment process that addresses the synthetic organics using the best available technology that we have available. And we would advise that that is probably a combination of ozone and biofiltration and or granular activated carbon filtration. Our proposal is to integrate these two and do ozonation and biofiltration using activated carbon as the filter on which the biofiltration takes place. So let me then try to put this all together in terms of 4 goals that we'd suggest that we have with this project. A little bit of a description of what we mean by that goal and then the recommendation for treatment. So the first goal is to have robust handling for high raw water turbidities. The idea is that we want to have stable operation even when there are periods of high turbidity for a fairly long time. And what does that mean? Well, it means requiring specifically that we have components for silt removal, sand removal, and that we have this clarification unit and significant capacity for handling solids. The second goal would be to meet regulations with room for comfort. We think the principal area where that requires consideration for investment here is in this question of maintaining disinfection byproducts well below regulated levels. And our recommendation there is to choose ozone for our primary disinfectant and chloramines for the secondary disinfectant. The third goal is to have a process that addresses synthetic organic chemicals, the pharmaceuticals, EDCs, and so on. And we've outlined what we recommend there. This is the process with ozone and GAC as a biological filter. Finally, we recommend that we use only proven processes, that we use processes that are already successfully operating in other plants. We can go visit, we can go see it. We're not running a new experiment here for the cities of Davis and Woodland. If I could, I want to quickly then go through each of these 3 goals and try to demonstrate how we're using proven processes as we described. So first, this goal of robust handling of high raw water turbidities. If you look at this pretreatment step that we're talking about, the 2 treatments we're talking about then are silt removal and clarification. And I've kind of already talked about it. The silt removal, we're proposing something like grit basins or some other common technologies used in river water for removing sand and silt and this coagulation and sedimentation step. And we're also recommending significant solids handling capacity. Examples, one is the vineyard plant that Eric worked on recently. These are the grit basins. You'll recognize them. It's the same picture that are at the, I think it's called the Freeport Inlet.
Yeah, you're right, the intake.
Yeah, they're part of the intake facility. And then the second slide here shows the Bowman Water Treatment Plant, which is operated by Contra Costa Water District, which has the coagulation and sedimentation basins that are typical of this clarification step that I'm describing. The little squares up at the top are where the chemicals are added and the flocculation takes place, and the long bases you see past that provide about an hour and a half of settling where the particles that are formed are separated from the water. Second goal, meeting the regulations with room for comfort. Again, we've recommended the use of ozonation for the primary disinfection and chloramines for the secondary disinfection step. And I have a slide here. I don't want to go through them all in detail, but just to illustrate, there are a dozen large treatment plants in California, perhaps more, that use this same process in order to address this same issue. And about 35% of the plants in the U.S. now use chloramines as their strategy for secondary disinfection. So there's lots of places we can go and explore this same treatment strategy. Now on the question of synthetic organics. The recommended alternative is really integrated with the other process we've seen, this question of ozone and biological filtration. And again, I have a list of, I think it's 15 plants in this case, that use this strategy. Not all of them use chloramines. For example, I think the Fairburn plant, the second one listed in Fairfield, uses free chlorine, but they also have the ozone biological filtration. So again, there are a lot of places we can visit, many of the same places we would go to see the ozone chloramine strategy. So just in terms of where we are, the next steps is we'll be finalizing this feasibility study and the benchmark treatment process that I just outlined to you. That'll be part of the RFQ. We'll then be completing the benchmark pre-design where we just try to outline a little more detail of the same process train. And that'll be part of the document we send out with the RFP, along with the specifications for the service contract, which will have to include some documentation on the water quality goals and the requirements we make there. That concludes my presentation. I tried to make it quick. They told me I had 15 to 20 minutes or you'd kick me out.
You did it in 17.
Thank you.
Any questions from the board? Yes, Director Doty.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was very, very good. I've got a question, though, back on synthetic organic compounds.
Please.
You said probably of no health significance.
I'm sorry?
Probably of no health significance. Right. I assume, I need clarification. By that, do you mean I drink a glass of the water, there's no health significance to what's in the water?
Yes.
Okay. What about a cumulative effect? I've seen paper from Davis on striped bass in the Delta, and also
on which striped bass?
Striped bass in the Delta, anomalies and deformities of the hatchlings, and also amphibians and even up reptiles. And I don't know if it's because there's an accumulation up the food chain, and then it's accumulating in the gonads and the fry, or if it's just a case of what's around them while they're being hatched. So that's my question. You say probably no health significance, but is there a cumulative significance? Do we know?
Well, my comment includes cumulative significance, but let me try and address the dilemma that you're observing and try to explain a little bit about it. Some of these compounds are actually worse for the fish, far worse than they are for us. Oh. A good example would be the natural hormones like estrogen and the synthetic hormones like 17-beta estradiol, which is what we put in birth control pills. Mm-hmm. Now, the levels that are out there in this water are on the order of 10,000, a factor of 10,000 or so below, in fact, the samples that we saw for estrogen. We did measure some estradiol. It was, I think, 5 nanograms per liter. If you drank that water, the dose is far below, several orders of magnitude below the therapeutic dose that people take. But at that level, it still affects fish because they live in it. And it does cause them to start changing sex. It causes them to begin to generate vitellogenin, which is a compound that in male fish that starts showing up should only be in female fish. So you start seeing effects in some fish in particular. The best work has been done in fish. There also been some work in reptiles. That's less clear, but there's certainly indications. So many of these compounds, the issues are more profound for the ecology, for the community that lives in the water than for the community that drinks the water.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Souza.
Thank you, Chair Marble. Within the four-step process of treatment of the water from the river, there are 4 stages, and the stages have different components that can be related to each stage.
Yes.
And each one of those components have a certain cost that's affiliated with them. And given what we choose, we could either choose and I'll use the Leaf as the lower end, or the Volkswagen, or we could choose the Cadillac as the upper end. I'd be interested in looking at, you're making recommendations based upon your years of of work in this field, but I don't know. I have no knowledge, so I don't know if this is the, we can get by with a Leaf or we need the Cadillac. And I don't know if in the long run we're better off going with the Cadillac because we're going to save ourselves a lot more money. We won't need to replace the batteries. We just have, an internal combustion engine and all that. So some analogy that is equivalent. So for me, I'd like to see, before we actually go out and do, a request for qualifications, and we start to spell out what some of the components are, if it's not in general terms. I mean, if it's in general terms, then that's fine, because once we get to a request for proposals, we're going to be more specific, and we're going to know exactly what we're asking in each one of these 4 steps. So I need to have a little more information, what are the best grit removal processes? And is this one grit removal process, more expensive because it has more concrete that's involved in the vessels that are doing the grit removal? Is there a cheaper way of going about this that maybe uses land components and 35 or 60 millimeter lined rubber that lines the facility that'll serve the same purpose? Are there alternatives that will in the long run cost us less and be just as effective, easily upgradable, and serve a purpose over the long period of the treatment facility?
Several comments I think I should make in response to that. The first one is, let me just, for what it's worth, characterize the process the way you had. I would say this is sort of a Buick.
I don't think they make those
but
anymore.
that's not my whole answer. But it's not a Cadillac.
Dropping
it's
that.
also not a Leaf. It's also not a Leaf. Also, I am not here laying out precisely how all the steps have to be done. One of the comments I made about the benchmark is it's not a specification. It's something where we sort of describe what we want, and then these guys out here are going to have lots of ideas about how to collect grit. But we are saying we want a process that does a good job with grit because we expect a lot of it and for prolonged periods of time. There are, however, some other elements of what we're saying when we, for example, say we would like to use ozonation instead of just chlorine. By doing that, we're putting ourselves in the realm where we can't just do the cheapest possible process that could meet the rules. Because there might be some risk, but we probably could meet the rules with just chlorine. It wouldn't do anything for synthetic organic chemicals. It wouldn't make us safe. This process will take us to the point where the disinfection byproducts we're looking at are, say, on the order of 1/3 or 1/4 of the regulated levels. With that, we'll be at like 3/4 of the regulated levels in the worst periods, perhaps sometimes right on the edge, but it probably is legal. So again, we don't have to have biofiltration with GAC, and we could do the biofiltration without GAC. If you look at those plants I have with ozonation biofiltration, I would say 1/3 of them use GAC for the media, and 2/3 do not. GAC, I think, works a little better. I think it will allow us to biodegrade compounds that would not otherwise be biodegraded. The cost penalty for that is not particularly high. It's much cheaper than the ozone step, for example, but it doesn't work very well without the ozone preceding it. So by painting the picture with that process in, we're probably going to put ourselves in a position where most of the proposals try to respond to the water quality issues we're trying to address with that element. And they'll either put that in which case we have no questions, or they'll put something else in and say that does the same thing, and they'll try to convince us that that's true. So that's kind of where we are. If you would like to have more discussion about different scenarios and whether you want to make those goals requirements, then I think we need a longer forum because it's a fairly complicated discussion.
Well, and I'll be off out of this, off the mainland for a few days, and in that process I'll be doing a bit of research on my own look at many of these components, and when I'm in the state of Maui, Hawaii, I will be looking at what they're using over on the islands, in particular, to see if there's anything new, different that they've actually looked at. And the reason I say this is I know that within this industry...
You love the water there, but I'm not sure the drinking water is the best water there.
Within this industry, I've, over the years that I've been on the council and now on this board, I have seen there's been a tendency to stay within certain parameters, very tight parameters. Don't go outside this box. Don't think outside the box that we've always thought about. And when I started to look outside the box, I see there are new, innovative strategies that, in my opinion, are far more environmentally beneficial, and that nobody has done them yet because nobody has tested them. So you sit within these parameters because everybody has tested these parameters. You're assured of these parameters. And in my field, that's the same way. I mean, ozonation is very seldom used in the disinfection of swimming pools and spa water. But it's not approved by many health bodies. But I can tell you, in my opinion, it is the best method to go, and it's just not being done. So I'm curious as to what you're seeing on the horizon, and I can converse with you, further, outside of this meeting. But
sure.
What are you seeing as something that, if we don't do today, would be very expensive tomorrow to add to the facility? But we sure wish we would have done it today when we went out and requested the folks in this room and whoever else may be responding to the IRFQ.
Actually, a thing that we could easily do to comment, it is actually not that difficult in treatment processes like this to try and design them with some provision for emerging technologies that could be added later. So that is another provision, another suggestion that we can make that we'd like to see in the project. For example, downstream of this biofiltration, because there are bacteria on the filter doing the biodegradation, you often get what we call heterotrophic plate count organisms, just heterotrophic organisms that have no health significance. Mm-hmm. But these are also regulated in a way because the health department doesn't allow you to measure coliform unless they're absent below a certain level. So we chlorinate the water after the filtration. We could use ultraviolet light. It costs a little bit more.
Right.
We could make provision for ultraviolet light. It's available today, but it's a cost that we can avoid experiencing. What is the downside of using the chlorine? Well, for the time that we need for the heterotrophic plate count, the chlorine reaction is, it reacts to those organisms very fast. The contact time is very short. We won't create much, but if we didn't do that, we could probably get DBPs and other order of magnitude lower. So, the question is, do you want to do that? Well, but the problem is, see, these things cost more money, not less money. Right. So I'd be happy to chat with you sometime about emerging technologies. One of the things we're doing here is sort of plays against the philosophy that I sort of hear there, which is my fourth requirement was a proven process. And I'm doing that in part because other projects have been involved, and I'm a little worried about the fact that some of the processes we tried were brand new and didn't work out quite as well as we like to see. So I'm enthusiastic about seeing a process that's proven that I know has been demonstrated somewhere else.
And then the last thing I would say is, and this comes from my own personal experience again, is that those who build, those who design, are generally not those who maintain. And what I find is that they'll do certain installations that are not conducive to maintenance down the road. And so now you've got this wonderful facility, but boy, is it going to cost you a lot more when it comes to removing a pump, putting in a new component. The cost of replacement is just extraordinarily high compared to another manufacturer that maybe manufactured the same product, but the replacement cost of a component within that particular apparatus is much cheaper. So, and you generally don't find that.
This is a real important issue, and
yes.
Actually, that's one of the attractive things to this process you've chosen for building the plant. With this design, build, operate process, if these guys build it, they've got to then operate it for 20 years. And when Eric, the fellow that, I'm thinking of the lawyer we hired that's helping us, Eric Peterson, whom you hired not too long ago. Believe me, he is real good at tying them up. So by the time you're through with the 20 years, they've got to give you a facility that's in the same condition it was the day they built it. So they really need to focus on this issue you're talking about with this strategy that you've chosen for construction.
Because in the long run, that's, what we're going to be assuming on an annual basis once we set rates is that actual cost of maintenance
of course,
and
they'll be
replacement.
committed to the price too, right? That's the way this process also works. Right from the day you enter, what the cost will be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Yes, Director Cravoza.
I'm extremely sympathetic to what Stephen is saying, and while I've appreciated the response here, it's not as far as I want to go. I mean, it strikes me, and Eric, you can everybody can try and talk me off of this, but this is an enormous decision that we're going to make. I mean, the decisions about the level of treatment and exactly what's going to be in the treatment plant. Once we make that. That is going to be, set in motion through the DBO process, and we're moving with the DBO process now. And we're going to be starting getting qualifications. The RFP is not going to go out until September, and I'd really like to know what the options are. I mean, this is a fantastic place to start, but if there's some things that we can try that are going to be more environmentally beneficial, that are going to add a little bit more cost, but potentially have a big upside down the road, I want to know what that is as a decision maker. Or if there's some things, maybe some older technologies that are kind of feeling kind of expensive in this, and we might be able to cut a cost now and then make a decision in 18 months about whether to, stick in another process. I think I want to know that now. Now, maybe some of that can be written into the DBO RFQ and then ultimately the RFP. But I don't quite feel like I have the universe of decisions and options in front of me yet. And that's not to say this isn't, exactly the right start. So can you, Chair Marble, think of how I'd like to know how that can be accommodated in the process.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that was one of the reasons we put on the agenda today, is just to introduce you to the topic and the complexities of that, and to allow you to understand some of the things we're going through, but we need guidance from you as well. And I'm not sure the context that we can work under, but we certainly would bring it back to you at meetings or special meetings before we hit key milestones. But perhaps there's a workshop that we can orchestrate where we can just focus on this issue, and I'm not sure that we can work that out, I'm sure, in terms of appropriate meetings, but I'm glad to hear that interest that's been expressed, because I really would like to do that.
Okay.
I see two avenues here, and was going to bring up one of them, but I'll bring it up now. One is I think it would be worthy of considering a subcommittee of a couple of very interested members of the board to work a little more closely with staff in this very critical phase. And the other is, of course, an enlarged study session at some point, or to have that subcommittee come back to this body. And I'm personally partial to the subcommittee idea, but leave it up to the board. And maybe there's another option that I haven't thought of amongst those, but those were some I wanted to address.
Well, I certainly welcome the discussion and the interaction. We had a workshop much like that with FPC, trying to get to the point to decide what I should present to you here. And I think the same kind of exercise would be richer with the discussion from you folks as well.
How would the board feel about appointing a subcommittee?
I think I would like to go in the direction of more of a workshop with all of us here, at least initially. And I think maybe the request might be for further staff work to take this as the baseline, but then, tell us, what we get if we move in the direction of the Cadillac, and what we get if we, move, lower. And then, what's that? The Buick. The Buick, yeah.
No, not the Buick.
We're at the Buick, aren't we?
No.
Are we,
The Buick's a T-Rex.
But I think at that point, and I mean, I think
We're not all in the Buick generation
I
here,
understand.
Yeah.
Well, the Buicks are still, and most of the cars.
Some of us understand what
There are
you're
two
saying,
Buicks
some
still.
others
Well,
don't.
I'll go with the
I don't know,
the
we all understand what a
Mercedes or
Cadillac
the
is
Jaguar.
either. That term has really become kind of obsolete.
I think it depends
anyhow,
on where
if we
you're
move
driving
toward the
it.
Yugo.
If I'd said a Pontiac, I'd have been in trouble, right?
Yeah. So you'd like to see us go towards a workshop?
Yeah, I think I would. I just think it's a very big decision, and I'm very interested too in us thinking about engaging some of our university experts, because I think that's where we start touching some of the cutting edge, and I hope you guys would enjoy it as well. And I think we've
I wrote
got
a book with one of your.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got environmental questions, which are one. I think we have cost questions, and then we have kind of consumer quality, and at least those are the three categories I can. Relative merits of going up and down.
Right, and I just want to remind you also that, again, like I mentioned at the beginning of my updates, that this really sets the bench, it's truly a benchmark. It's really our expectations, and we need your input and guidance on that, but then we're allowing the DBO teams really to use their ingenuity to achieve what we want to achieve.
Right.
And so, but I think it's good that you have an understanding of the relative cost implications of these various different processes.
And, this is not a critique of this work at all. It's just, just making sure
I take it as interest, not criticism.
Yeah, Marty?
Yeah, I support the idea of a full workshop for the board and as much expert backing and advice that we can get. I understand that what we're doing is a response to regulatory issues, but I'd like to think that we're doing it because it's the right thing environmentally to do. And if we're going to have to reach a balance, cost, quality, and environmental impact, I'd like to know what it is I'm having to give up for the cost.
Okay.
How would the board feel about having a subcommittee that filters that a little bit going into the workshop and still having a workshop?
You bet.
Yep, I'm happy with that.
That's okay.
Anybody that would like to participate on that subcommittee?
I nominate Stephen for the subcommittee. Given the work he's going to be doing the next couple of weeks, I want to make sure it's as productive as possible.
He's going to be working on sand filtration.
He's going to be in Maui. He's going to be surfing.
Turbidity.
Golfing.
That'd be great.
As long as the subcommittee meets in Maui, I'm all for it.
That's right. I'll give you a call from there.
Anybody else that would be interested in serving?
I'd like to.
Marty, would you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a
Then
different set of interests than Steve, but I think they're both appropriate.
do we need any kind of a action on that, Richard?
Yes, either, the chair could just designate
Okay.
that subcommittee.
Okay. Well,
I would like to also ask, what's the timing that you would like to see on this?
I think that we kind of have to depend a little bit on your understanding of where we're at in this process, especially with the RFQs. We know we're not making the design ourselves. Part of the design build process, operate process, is that we would have people with expertise even beyond our university participating in that. But what I sense from the board is a greater desire to know some of the things that could influence costs now and in the future, and environmental now and in the future.
Right.
So leave it to you as to when the best timing is, so that we don't get too far ahead of that RFQ and RFP process, that we can't have that input.
Because, again, Dr. Trussell mentioned that this is going to be a pretty general for the SOQ, and we'll get more specific once we get the shortlisted firms in terms of the expectations. So it's not like this is the be-all and end-all.
Okay.
That is true in terms of just the general stages of the process. The RFQ, what we're really doing is trying to get a group of an invitation to a group of firms interested. No matter where we come out in this discussion, Yugo, Cadillac, et cetera, I don't think anyone will lose interest. And likewise, I don't think it'll have much impact on our ability to judge qualifications either. So we can move in parallel, I think, with this discussion.
Okay.
Good.
Good.
Would you
And then, then Stephen and Marty are appointed to that committee, and it seems to be a unanimous feeling to go ahead that way. If we don't need a formal action, Richard, then consider that done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That's very good.
Appreciate it. We're on to item 8, which is to consider a consultant services agreement. Eric, do you want to handle that?
Yes.
Microphone again, I think. Is it up? It's okay.
Gotta get used to that.
have a little
Allowing us
snippet.
to execute an agreement with Ralph Tellis Financial Consultants to provide us financial services during the course of developing the RFQ, evaluating the statement of qualifications that we receive, providing input during the request for proposal phase, as well as evaluating the proposals relative to the financial aspects of what's being proposed, as well as to the financial status of the various team members that would be part of the DBO teams.
Any questions from members of the board?
When you say the financial status, are you talking about basically their ability to fulfill the RFQ or the RFP?
Yes, it's services that they have provided before with regard to DBO teams. They've worked before with Eric Peterson, our special counsel, but it's relative to the stability of firms, their ability to be there 20 years from now, the full teams, and to provide the services that we're requiring.
Thanks.
Director Cravoza?
Yeah, I certainly endorse bringing on kind of experts in this area. But we're going all the way to Charlotte, North Carolina to find this expertise, and I just want to be assured that, and I know others were considered, but, and I don't want to do an RFP to choose the firm that's going to help us do the RFP, right? That keeps going on and on forever. But, so can you assure me that we're going to North Carolina and there's nobody in California that we would choose to do this?
I can't give you that absolute assurance, other than that we're going to this firm, that we're recommending going to this firm. We've talked to several other firms. This is a pretty specific requirement. We wanted somebody who had the specific experience in doing this type of work. We talked to firms such as KMPG, major firm. We talked to Citibank. And we were impressed with this firm and this individual, particularly his most recent experience relative to design build activities and his relationship with Eric Peterson also.
Okay, and then is there expertise in DBO generally, or I guess just as I was looking at this, I figured they were DBO with regard to water projects.
No, their experience is with regard to financial services for municipalities, and particularly water and wastewater, rate setting, financial analysis, as well as working on design-build type of projects, and from the owner's standpoint in terms of assessing financial abilities and stability of the participating firms.
Okay.
The competing firms.
Okay, so and this really is then quite a niche market that they fill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Marty?
Eric Peterson's the one in New York, is that right?
Yes.
I had the same questions when we were reviewing the RFP responses on his, and actually reviewed them and concurred with staff. They were absolutely right. He was the most qualified.
Okay.
Even though he is in New York. So.
We went through this at great length and detail and process before you came on the board relative to Mr. Peterson, and so we don't need to go through that one again. But
Okay.
just be assured that
All right.
that was fully vetted.
I like local.
Very good. There's no other questions, and we'll entertain a motion.
I'll move the item.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Item 9, regarding these committees, Eric, are you or Dick going to take that?
Following up on the package of agreements we talked about earlier in the meeting, one of the agreements is this joint intake agreement with RD 2035, and the contract sets forth a management structure. Many of the key decisions will be made and implemented through a management committee. The management committee will then have oversight by a policy committee. The management committee is by contract a two-person committee, one by the RD 2035, one by this agency's board, and the policy committee is intended to be a four-person committee, two appointed by each party. During the next phases in this contract, as we go through design and permitting and then into construction, a lot of technical issues are going to need to be decided and resolved by the management committee, and if needed, referred up to the policy committee. What staff recommends is, as far as the appointments at the management committee level, Jim Yost of West Yost Engineering has been and is the project engineer, and we feel that he'd be the appropriate guy to sit on the management committee and work with his counterpart at 2035, who we don't know who that will be yet, but they're aware of the need to make that appointment as well. And secondly, at the policy level committee to handle things that need to be referred up from the management committee, we thought it's important to have some staff level expertise as well as some policy level input. So our recommendation on that would be General Manager Dr. Mishi plus one of you. We were not so presumptuous as to put in our staff report, the one of you that we would recommend to serve, but that would be our recommendation, would be Dr. Mishi plus one of you that might be willing to serve on that management committee. The management committee would serve irregularly as needed. In contrast, the management committees, did I say that wrong? Yeah, the policy committee will meet irregularly as needed, and in contrast, the management committees will meet on a monthly basis. Any questions?
This is just for the RD 25 work?
This is just for the RD 2035 joint intake work, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would include both during the design, construction, and operations. It would carry into operations, that whole concept
Oh, okay.
of having both committees.
So this is a commitment of several years?
Pardon me?
This is a commitment then of several years?
Well, I mean, you obviously could change representatives,
Right.
but the intent of, the point I wanted to make was that this is a committee not just for the design, not just for, it's a continuum through operations.
Thank you.
as
I was
well.
thinking in a narrower scope. Thanks.
Well, I mean, that's a tough one. I certainly think that maybe the chair or the vice chair ought to be in that position since it's a policy-making position, but I'm happy to have it be anybody.
Yeah, I was going to make that same suggestion, but that only gets us halfway there.
I'll leave it to someone else to make. What do you think, Steve?
Well, we rotate the chair and the vice chair over time, and we could easily set as a standard that it rotates either with the chair or the vice chair, and we've been running on about a 2-year cycle here, so that's about a 2-year time frame. We're about almost to the point of rotating the positions between yourself and myself, and then bringing in another member of the board to fill both of our seats as we move along. I mean, for me, I think we should keep it with the chair. That's frankly the way I believe that we've been sort of dealing with this, but it doesn't stop us at any. Well, the question I guess I would have is, what happens in the case, and I guess you would work around whatever conflict may exist in the time schedule of the individual from the board that serves on that if that individual isn't available, we don't have within the parameters of the agreement an alternate.
Right. The way the contract is structured is you would still, on that 4-member policy committee, any actions by the committee would still take 3 votes. So you know, if you only had one, if you needed to meet and you only had one member, you know, the one member's vote would be needed to take action at that level. So you'd still have some protection in that way. But you're right, we did not structure in alternatives. Again, it's expected that this will be an irregular situation, scheduled as needed, and in those situations it will be advisable for the agency to be fully represented with two members at that committee.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I have a pretty clear idea what the management committee will be doing. What kind of actions would you anticipate the policy committee would be doing? What kind of issues could come up for the policy committee?
They would really be disputes. They would be things where, you know, Jim Yost and his counterpart couldn't agree. And they say, well, gosh, you know, we just can't agree, we're going to bump it up. So it's really a dispute resolution body.
Oh.
There's no regular sort of jurisdiction.
It's not a regular meeting or something like that.
Yeah, it's really just, you know, disputes, disagreements, things that can't be resolved at the staff level where they feel, and it may well be that at the management committee, the two management committee guys look at each other and say, you know, this is an important policy, we need policy input. So it could also be policy input where the two managers realize that we want to bring in some policy input on this because it's an important, costly decision and there's some pros and cons, and so it may be decisions like that as well. But it's things that are sort of referred to you on an irregular basis.
Seems like huge issues would probably come back to the board anyway.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
But,
well, you know, I guess on that, it feels to me like it makes sense for the position to move with the chair. And then, you know, because the chair then actually probably is ultimately responsible for deciding whether to bring something back to the full board or whether or not we've already taken a position that they feel they can represent. And in fact, our chair and our executive officer being able to, you know, confer in that context. So at least I'd be comfortable making that motion that our representative to the policy committee for the joint intake be to move with the chair position of the Clean Water Agency.
Oh, I was going to suggest vice chair because I don't think he has nearly enough to do. But since these aren't regular meetings, you're off the hook, Steve.
Well, and my feeling is that there'll never be a disagreement with the management committee. Never have to have the policy
like
committee
this board.
Well, if there's a major rift with the management committee, I'd like to point out the policy committee is also 4 members. And it's going to take a lot of dispute resolution to get that third vote, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm good to support the chairman.
Yes.
All right, is that a second then?
Yes.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We need to move back to the item. Stephen, thank you for reminding me. The resolution approving Yolo County as a participating agency. I think you all had a chance to look at that. Marty?
I just have one question, and it's for Richard, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I don't have a copy of the bylaws in front of me. How is a participating agency defined?
Sure, let me read that for you. That's section 4.2 of the Joint Powers Agreement, and with respect to UC Davis, we knew at the time of the Joint Powers Agreement that it was appropriate for UCD to be a participating agency. So it's, you know, by contract, by the Joint Powers Agreement, we agreed that Davis would participate as a participating agency, and it then went on and contemplated that there may be other participating agencies that the board may wish from time to time approved by resolution. And the key part is the participating agency shall be entitled to participate in open session board meetings regarding the planning, design, construction, and operation of the project. The agency may consult from time to time with current and potential future participating agencies regarding project design, planning, and implementation. Agency may cooperate and consult with current and potential future participating agencies regarding countywide and regional water planning, management, and conjunctive use issues. And then it goes on to the participating agency may appoint a non-voting member to the board who shall sit with the 4 voting directors at an open session board meetings and have the right to participate in public board discussions, but shall not be counted towards a quorum, may not make or second motions, and may not participate in closed session meetings.
Okay, because none of that was in the resolution, but I assumed we were referring back. I needed that definition.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries unanimously.
So,
And
Chairman Marwell, just to confirm, so this was Resolution 2010-04 that we approved. Does that become Resolution 2011-01?
Yes, the resolution number will be different.
Okay.
I'll look to the secretary. I think it's our first resolution of the year.
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
Okay, but the record can reflect.
we'll let
et
you
cetera.
two attorneys figure it out here.
No, good catch. Good catch.
Very detailed. Does he do that at council?
Very good. And I don't know exactly the nature of the resolution that the county adopted on Tuesday. I just know that they, in the event that we acted positively, that Mr. Saylor has been appointed by the county to be their supervisor that would be on this board.
Very good.
And Eric, if you and Dick would follow up with county staff and make sure we've done things appropriately there between us, we'll move forward. Technical Advisory Committee comments?
Technical Committee does not have anything to add at this time. Thank you.
You don't want to give us a dissertation on sand filtration?
No. He's going to do that.
We're planning on going to Hawaii with Stephen to study that issue.
I'm going to have to expand my tea time next Thursday.
San Diego last month, but that's not quite the same thing. So.
Yeah, very good. Board member comments? Director Doty?
No, I have nothing to.
Vice Chair Souza?
Looking forward to delivering my non-read statement to the State Water Resources Control Board next Tuesday at about 10:30. I know the meeting starts at 9.
Can I ask
It's going to be a very important day, and I'm hoping that we don't have to go into 2 days of deliberation, and it's so cut and clear that by the end of the hearing, we get a unanimous vote to issue our water permits.
I'm also going to the hearing, and remember, it's a summary. Do not read your statement,
I
read
know.
a summary. Do you actually think it'll go to the 19th?
Whether or not the hearing goes 2 days, I don't know. It depends in large part on the other side, the protestants. And also just to Mr. Souza, it's a hearing to hear the evidence, and whether it's unlikely there will be a decision made that day. The decision will come probably sometime later.
I could hope.
You can hope.
Thank you.
Two things before we close. Eric, do we have a date anticipated for the February special meeting that you might?
No, I hope to have it as soon as possible in February. I do not have a date yet, though.
Okay. And then a request I have, and perhaps it's premature, but I don't think so, would be to, if our chair is supportive, or the whole board's supportive, I'd like some clarification from our attorneys on how the fluoridation decision would be made with respect to the treatment facility. We have 2 cities involved. We have a clean water agency that's a JPA. My hunch is that this body is not the body that makes that decision. My hunch is that it's the cities. But how that would happen, when it would have to happen, it may in fact get folded into this water benchmark that's going to be included or not, I don't know. But I'd like to understand legally, and I guess maybe even technically, the timing and the process, if in fact we go down that road. And then I'm hoping we can find a dentist from Woodland or something to tell us about the issue.
Yeah, I had copious notes here, but in the interest of time, I won't take them all. But that was one item that I had, was it is important, because we've had public comment today, and we should have some clarification, as Director Cravoza indicates, as to either A, the role of this agency, or the possible role of this agency, or the non-role of this agency, and timing.
That's a good recommendation. We will provide something for the board on that at your next meeting.
I concur with that, and I know that from the phone call I got yesterday, there is now a countywide group of interested individuals that has been formed. So we will be having, I would bet, more folks coming before us with this issue as it moves forward.
Right. And as you all know, and as I conclude my comments, fluoridation's been in the news here in the last couple of weeks. It is important, I think, for the public to know that although the dosage level in water has been changed by federal agencies, the recommendation, and endorsed by the American Dental Association, fluoridation itself has not been altered in terms of it being a recommended public health entity to help decrease the level of dental disease in the population. And having some small expertise in that area, I would just indicate that it's my feeling that fluoridation is beneficial, and I would certainly support it, and as long as I'm not running askew of any conflict of interest, that will certainly be my position.
I would think it would be anti-conflict for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, my colleagues will hate it because they'll make less money.
As your financial advisor, I'd like to advise you.
Anyway, I do want to report on one other thing in terms of my report. On Monday, the Water Resources Association of Yolo County met, and several important things happened at that meeting. I think you all know that the WRA consists of all the cities in Yolo County as well as the county, and the reclamation districts, including RD 2035, which we've talked about tonight. I'd like to report to you that we had a member of the city council present from every city at that meeting who serve on that board. We also had the county represented with 2 supervisors and each of the reclamation districts. And Eric Mishi presented at that meeting a summary of the agreements that took place last month and responded to questions. Matt Rexroad and Dirk Brazil presented a summary of the county agreements that took place and answered questions. And then we had a very good discussion from NACWA regarding some of the things that we can do in Northern California to be more closely linked together. So, and I think our action today in including an additional board member or 2 at this table in months to come is indicative of our desire as a board to work together in a closely collaborative way with all of the entities that are involved in this county with delivering the water to Woodland and Davis and UC Davis, hopefully in the most cost-effective way possible. And we just want to thank staff. We know you've all been busy, especially during a massive Christmas season, and we thank you for the good work you've done. With that, we'll adjourn the meeting.